welcome to See You Try. So we're here today. I'm with
Samyra, Leonard,
and
Jessica McCann.
And we're here to continue our conversation about trauma and strategies that are happening in the community to address trauma and talk about trauma in the efforts of trying to make a more resilient and healthy community. So I am super excited to have you, Jessica, because, and I'll let you share a little bit about like who you're with and why I invited you. So, but I'm super excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Okay.
We appreciate it.
Great.
Yes, so I'm with Crisis Nursery here in Urbana. And Crisis Nursery, we're a 24-hour emergency child care facility. So we offer care to families who can be going through any kind of a crisis, and we encourage families really to define their own crisis with children ages 0 through 6. And we're just available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and try to provide that safe place to sort of be that extra support when a family needs it, and we all have those times. So.
That's wonderful, and I'm so happy that you clarified crisis because, right, that was the stickler is that so many people don't understand how to utilize your support, which is such a valuable resource, and so I hope people heard loud and clear that crisis is however the family defines it, and that they're there with love and care and kindness and compassionate to be there. So
Absolutely.
So one of the reasons why I invited you here is, you know, when we were trying to think about talking about trauma, that's one of those issues that comes up everywhere. Like, how do we increase conversations about trauma? You, Crisis Nursery, has been on the front end of thinking about, like, talking about trauma and educating your staff, your clients, your families about trauma. And so I was like, Crisis Nursery, they're wonderful. Like, have them come in and share a little bit about why talking about trauma seemed important to you.
Sure, yeah. We're learning a lot about trauma ourselves as we go, and that's something that has become important to us the more that we learn. We just know that we're all impacted by trauma, from the staff that service our organization, directors, administrators, donors, stakeholders, and every family, every walk of life. We're all impacted by trauma in our community, and how we interact with one another and how we support one another. It's so important that we know the approach to doing that, and that's something we're learning and hoping to implement more of at Crisis Nursery.
Great. So, Samyra, did you have any thoughts? Because that was perfect, and I was wondering, had you thought about the full range of, you have a lot of different programs, and I don't think people know the full range of opportunities, but have you thought a little bit about like how trauma shows up in the various programs or how it connects to the range of works? Because you talked about the Crisis Nursery as a drop-in place, but I know that there's homework and family visitors and Beyond Blue and...
Thank you for expanding on that. Yes, and I think the general community is more familiar with our drop-in child care or emergency child care. But yes, trauma does show up in so many different ways in our organization. We do have programs, like you said, that service the home. So we have a home visiting program called Strong Families. We hope to really provide a follow-up service to that emergency child care. Families also don't have to be enrolled in emergency child care or have used it to receive home visiting. But essentially, it's another free service that we offer. One program that you mentioned, Beyond Blue, we serve moms, and we're really starting to include dads and even grandparents who may be experiencing that struggle. So any symptoms of postpartum or perinatal depression, there's no diagnosis required, just presenting symptoms. And as you said, yes, trauma shows up in many different ways. And so there can be traumatic experiences, maybe with birth, that could cause some of those concerns. Traumatic experiences that might cause some of that complex trauma that you've talked about with maybe situations in the home, unrest in the family when baby's born, while all trying to manage a new baby. So there's that. We also have another branch of our home visiting program that focuses on children and families up to age 3.
Wow.
And our hope is to provide developmental support, but really continue that bridge that we started with the Beyond Blue program with parent-child attachment, things like that. So Yes, and we see trauma come into play in many different ways in that. But I think the beauty of that is that trusted relationship that families build with our home visitors, and knowing that that is part of what heals.
Wow.
That is amazing.
A lot.
Are you? I was like, and you're like, no, I'm breathless.
Yeah, losing my voice as I say it.
So I guess more specifically, wow, it's just nice depth and breadth in terms of having a real complex and broad relationship with families in the community. Seems wonderful. When you thought about like trying to educate people about trauma, what were some of the things that you've tried or done to get people to understand why you would do so many different things, right? To be supportive of families, but also just trying to educate people. What are some of the things that you've tried or done?
Well, we know some things that we haven't quite gotten to that we would love to try, and that really all started with parent feedback, with our staff feedback, and really talking to those who are in the thick of it, or who have worked with others who are in the thick of it. And a lot of things that we have found is just that sometimes simple things like communication, that is a huge one. Communication externally amongst other providers, communication with a family's understanding of what we do. The word crisis can be big and scary if we don't really know what it means, or what our interpretation of it is.
Yeah.
And so I would say communication is probably one of the biggest pieces. And so how we get that out as far as outreach or talking with other providers, and really how we communicate what we do to families as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect answer, because one of the trauma-informed values, right, is being trustworthy and being transparent and helping people understand how to navigate your system and what you offer and how to get in and how to get out. And so it's completely aligned with practice values. And I love the piece around your reflection that one of the things that trips people up, right, is that sometimes providers don't communicate well, and they make it harder for families, and so there's some redundancy in the process. So I want to come back to you, Jessica, but I was just curious, Samyra, because I realized this is our second show, like, and all of a sudden I was like, we've been talking about trauma, like throwing it out. Do you have anything? Like, I was like, maybe we should spend some time sort of unpacking that. So do you have like things that you could share in terms of when we talk about trauma, like what do you think we're talking about and why are we talking about it? Because again, it's our second show, so I don't know if everybody's caught up with that definition.
When we talk about trauma, we talk about one of the big things that people often talk about are adverse childhood experiences. So recognizing different things that occur in children's lives and things that disrupt families. People often think of like trauma as having to be some type of big, scary event that has to happen to somebody, but it doesn't. It's any experience or toxic stress that affects you mentally, emotionally, because we know that from research, we understand that trauma affects how your body responds to situations, how you moderate your behaviors, how you are able to or not able to process your own emotions, how you interact with people around you. And so the effects of situations on you, that plays out in all streams of your life. So it impacts how you learn, and impacts how you are able to build friendships and communicate with your partner in relationships. It may have negative effects that make you afraid to engage with service providers or afraid to get out in the community. And so in addressing trauma and talking about it and having people understand that it's not just some big scary event, that small things are traumatic because it's based on how you interpret a situation, it's very important for service providers, people in the community, to be receptive of that and be able to respond and provide support for people.
Yeah.
That's a good explanation.
The nice, simple, comprehensive. I was going to ask, I was like, is there anything else you want to add, Jessica?
I don't think so. I think you covered that well. And the one thing that stuck out to me too is how trauma shows up, what that looks like. And so, like you were saying, providers really being aware of maybe what that looks like and how we receive that, and even what we bring to the table.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when we think about trauma education, I know that that's one of the things that we've been advocating for and that you're trying to do is to make sure that the people who work with kiddos, understand what to look for. Other things that, in terms of the trauma education piece that you think, boy, I wish more people knew what? Like, because you were saying it shows up in behavior. What else could you say about that? Like, that you would want from an educational piece?
Sure. Yeah, so just absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head with behavior. I think a lot of times, depending on what we're bringing to the table, we may not realize someone's intention or really what's been a trigger for a past trauma experience. And so really helping our staff to understand, or volunteers, that, a family may, or an individual may not be just being rude, or may not be just having a bad day, but rather certain restrictions with scheduling, or certain tone of voice, or a smell, or a physical appearance of the setup of a room. Really all of those details can impact behavior that might come out, and it might be uncomfortable for a provider even. So really understanding what that looks like and what we can do proactively to either prevent that, as well as how to intervene when we maybe don't get it right.
Wow. It sounds like you're being really, I guess I want to stress that it sounds like you're being really intentional and being really comprehensive about your approach to sort of looking at this issue. And I love the fact that you brought in the lens, and so you didn't just talk about trauma as it's reflected in the kiddos, that you said, hey, I want to make sure that we're talking about it, how it shows up in the lives of the families that we're working with, and the staff that show up here, and our volunteers. And so that's nice that you're being so strategic. The big question is, to what aim? So what are you hoping will be intended outcomes? What are you looking for?
That's a great question. Yes. So our hope in the end of all of it is that folks feel comfortable using our service. I think that, there's no one culture, economic background. Crisis Nursery is really a place for any person, any family with a child in the age range, really. And so we just hope that folks feel comfortable to use our services, that they feel safe, and that our services also are something that folks feel like they can navigate. Just that it makes sense, and that we don't cause any additional damage in the process, basically by providing those services. So those are all thoughts and hopes and things. We're definitely a work in progress.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that was one of the one thing that really stuck out that you said was that you don't want to re-traumatize the people who are using your services. And so in creating the safe, open, transparent space, that's where you're asking and allowing people to come in and feel as though they can trust you and build relationships with you. And those are some of the key foundations of building a relationship that one supports the client, but then also helps them in healing from their own trauma. So that's really awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've learned a lot from you all as well.
Well, I was going to ask you, so you're pretty early on in the process. Not really, because you started talking about we didn't explain, but you started screening for adverse childhood experiences a while ago. So there's a big there's a study around looking at how childhood adversity impacts wellness and health and well-being, and so there are places that use just like a tool that just help families reflect on their trauma, so that they could be better educated, so that they could be aware of how their experiences might be related to things that they're experiencing with kiddos, but also talk to providers about their well-being. And I guess I was wondering, so you've had a trauma lens way before becoming involved in our learning collaboratives, and so I would love to know what kind of changes, how has it changed maybe conversations at work, or among staff, how have they received this sort of intentional focus?
Sure. So initially when we did start using the ACE questionnaire or study, I think it did allow us to be more intentional in really beginning to understand people, understand individuals. And it also started a resilience conversation where we could talk with parents about maybe, you know, this is what you've experienced, but what is it that maybe you want to happen differently for your own child, and what kinds of things or protective factors can we put, walk alongside you to put into place to do that differently. And so that conversation started. I think it also helped us as providers to identify maybe further referral. So, you know, crisis care can be a source where we maybe see someone, just a child, for 24 hours or up to 72 hours. But if we see that ACEs and we know kind of what's a little bit more about what's gone on in the family, that conversation may have not otherwise opened. And so we'll go a little deeper and go a little further with the family and provide some additional resources. So that was definitely where we started. And now I think just with the information that we've had from our work together, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, you know, it's something that we've been able to really start more formally explaining and training our staff on. We just had our first in-service for trauma recently, so definitely a step that we're headed in.
Okay. Well, right, a great segue. In terms, so do you want to talk a little bit about how that first in-service went, or what you're having? Yeah, like I would love to hear.
Sure. So, yes, so we've started to apply what we're calling Trauma 101. It's obviously in our context for early childhood providers. And we're pulling some material that we learned in our information with you, Karen, just about some of the things that you were explaining, Samyra, about how trauma impacts the brain, how it impacts our bodies, and just all the different areas. And then mainly how children are impacted according to different ages and stages of life. And then really helping our staff to recognize what those signs are preventatively. So if we can get to know some triggers, maybe we can provide some care in a way that prevents some of those behavioral responses that are more challenging. So that is kind of how the first session went. And so we hope to offer that once per quarter with our agency, or every 3 months or so. And our requirement is that every staff member will eventually be trained.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's our hope.
So you're being very intentional about this. And I was just thinking about even what you were so excited that you're doing your rollout, yay! But also was thinking about your experience with the adverse childhood experience questionnaire that you were administering, and how you use that as a tool to talk about resilience, to talk about protective factors, to use it as a prevention strategy, not just to sort of focus on like what went wrong, but also what you want to work right, like what are the possibilities. And that, because I sometimes, I know when people hear us talk about trauma all the time, they think that that's all we talk about, and they don't understand that the flip side of that conversation is resilience and recovery and health and growth and possibility.
Absolutely. We often will say, okay, so here's the good news, you know, once we're talking about trauma, and then we get to that part about the healing resiliency, it's nice to offer some hope in that conversation too.
Well, so Samyra, I was going to ask you, so Jessica sort of let the segue to say, hey, what are we doing around sort of trauma education? And I know you might have some thoughts like around things that we have coming up that you might want to share with people, and then we'll go back to thinking about some more things that are happening at Crisis Nursery.
Yeah, so right now, you know, we're finishing up with our healing solutions. We still have several sessions left, and so far the feedback we received is amazing. People are actually not only understanding how getting a better understanding of trauma, how to build resilience, cultural confidence, but also understanding and processing their own traumas and things that, you know, they've experienced, and how that impacts how they interact with people and consumers. And so I think that's one of the big things that we often overlook, is that when we're talking about how to address trauma and how to provide support and how to help families and communities build resilience, we often don't take a step to like look back at you know, the things that we've dealt with. And one of the first things you need to do in order to have a positive effect on people is, heal from things that you've experienced and be able to understand that so that you can provide those tools so people can build the skills to sustain and survive and keep leading healthy lives. And so next week we're starting our 2-session trauma education training, and so that'll be from 12:30 to 4:30 at New Covenant Fellowship. And so the trauma education training is a little different from Healing Solutions because we want to focus specifically on providing you with the tools and skills to understand trauma, how to explain it to different organizations and groups, and so that you can, one, tell them, explain the importance of understanding trauma, the signs and symptoms, but then also providing resources, providing talking points around how to collaborate and how to operate in a community and how to access the resources that are underutilized often so that we can help and continue to have these solutions to build a healthy community. And so the registration is still open. You are more than welcome to bring a friend, bring a team. The more people that are educated about trauma and know how to talk about it and know how to share and communicate resources, the more collaboration and the better we're going to be.
So that multiple organizations can kind of share the model that you talked about, where you can offer it for your staff, for your volunteers, for your congregation, so that more and more people can make this accessible. So I'm going to go back to that larger question. Thank you so much for sharing that. So that larger question is, why do you think it's important for our community to be so literally, we're the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative. You're doing work, other people are doing work, there's conversations are happening in almost every human service space and some community spaces. Why do you think it's important that we are doing this and trying to make this a priority,
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we are a people service. We're all serving people, and we all are people, and we all have lots of experiences that come together, and it's just so important that we can be present for one another to assist in healing. And I think at the end of the day, understanding the education, the terms, communication, what behavior shows up, how our bodies are impacted, all of those things just really impacts how we can heal and how we can move along as individuals. And we can best support one another in that by really knowing about trauma, its impacts, and what we can do together as a community to heal. And I think it takes, it takes each individual, but it also takes agencies and resources and families. And so the more we can learn, the more we can educate, like you were saying, the more we can collaborate. Samyra.
That was so beautifully said. I was like, that should be recorded. It is being recorded.
Well, it's the truth. So thank you. Yeah, but absolutely, that's really the purpose of what we're doing in the end, is that we're all people, and so, yeah.
So Samyra, any thoughts that you'd like to add? Because Jessica said a mouthful of very articulate, but why do you think we're making such a hype around trauma? Or what would you like to tell our audience about why so much focus?
I would say it's because we all experience, more likely than not, have some experience of trauma, some high stressor that affects how we process our feelings, how we interact with each other. And so if we're not addressing those things, and if we're not educating our systems around how to respond to those traumas and how to assist and support people, then it just creates a cycle where we're not healing, we're not operating at our full capacity. And so we want to break that cycle. We want people to feel successful. We want people to be able to, I know that they have their own strengths and they have, support systems in the community, because that's how we continue to grow and that's how we continue to support and serve people. So.
And I know I typically just ask questions, but I feel compelled to actually answer this one, because for me it's been super important. Because one of my favorite quotes says, we get sick in community and we get well in community. And I love thinking about how do we sort of excavate, look at like what went wrong and what might be broken in individuals, families, and communities, but then also look at what we could do to prevent, to promote healing, promote wellness and recovery. And because I love Champaign-Urbana, right? I love our community. But if you look at the signs and symptoms, like there are a lot of signs and symptoms of trauma. So when people are concerned about schools or violence or community health issues or all kinds of things, we have lots of poverty. We have lots of symptoms of like trauma, and I believe we have all the capacity as a community to be better. So part of it starts with kind of increasing our education and awareness about it and changing how we can recognize, like what you said, Jessica, signs and symptoms that people present with are often trauma, not bad behavior or inappropriateness. It really is that people are doing the best that they can. We absolutely have to change how we respond to people who've been impacted by trauma, and then we need to not re-traumatize them or ourselves. And so if we could do the 4 R's, right, then I feel like we could have a much more loving and connected community. So I really, anything else that I think he said we have a few more minutes, any final closing words that you would like to remind our audience about or say?
I think you've really covered it. Thank you so much. Crisis Nursery is here. Just know that, just a phone call away. There's really no reason that's not okay to call. If you're unsure, maybe just give us a call and ask. And it's a safe place. And just thank you so much for having us.
Thank you
today.
so much. Thank you.